My background is as a graphic journalist. I'm a Reynolds Fellow this academic year, and as Katie mentioned, I'm focusing on transmedia. But what I wanted to do was sort of explore, seeing as we have the luxury of a little bit more time than I will have next week at ONA, explore the journey from my graphic journalism through to transmedia, and explain a little bit about the link between the stories that I was formerly telling as a comics journalist through to the sort of immersive transmedia interactive pieces that I do, that I'm working on currently. So this is typically like the first, I'm not sure if you can make that out. Can we kill the light on the screen? Thanks. The sort of first thing that...
That's the screen. I'll get it.
The first thing that springs to mind when people think about graphic journalism is some sort of ungodly marriage between high art and very lowbrow cartoons, removed of all seriousness, not based in reality, principally humorous. Obviously, I'm here to dispel that stigma and hopefully convince you of a number of the advantages that it has over conventional reporting and how that feeds into transmedia. So the first of these is how I approach my interviews. Very typically, it's sort of traditionally like the same sort of conventional process you would go through as a reporter, except that I use images as well. So there are, all the speech balloons are direct quotes, verified and transcribed from recorded audio. And I just incorporate other infographics like maps, and it allows you to simultaneously put a number of different voices. So you can have a sort of a narrative with caption boxes as your own voice or as the speaker's, the interviewee's voice. So interviews, typically. This is one example from Borderland, a series I did with a Fulbright Commission back in 2009, focusing on human trafficking in Ukraine and around Eastern Europe. And so really the advantage of using this sort of graphic journalism was that it allowed me to be in front of these people and share their stories without necessarily having to put a camera in their faces. But you can also see some of the shot choices that I made when I was recording these interviews and transcribing them into sort of a visual narrative is very first person. So already I was thinking about ways to really situate the reader in the story. This is the cover of it, and again, the beauty of using a visual medium excuse me, is that it also allows for easier feedback loops. So we, me and my collaborator, Olga Trusova, we printed out our comics and had them delivered to the NGOs that we work with on the ground, and they were able to give us concrete feedback and say, which you can see there, hopefully it was constructive. Sometimes it involved redraws. I remember I drew a garbage can or a trash bin wrongly, so they were like, please, redraw that, and so it was a question of finding a relevant picture reference and making sure everything was sourced correctly. It was also turned, as you can tell by the raw enthusiasm from this onlooker in Ukraine, into a traveling exhibition, and so the panels served as kind of an outdoor interactive art piece. People were able to walk around. It became kind of like a collective discussion stroke meeting point, and this toured around a number of at-risk areas in Eastern Europe. And since, I believe, 20,000 copies have been printed in Russian and Ukrainian by the International Organization for Migration. So it's very much a grassroots tool of spreading awareness. So oral testimonies are obviously a key part of this sort of storytelling, and this is actually a comic that I did about birth rights in the NHS and the contrasting experience of newborns and their mothers through the national health system in England. So it's again a sensitive issue, and we had all the audio, but there wasn't a way of, we didn't have any accompanying footage to pair it with. So I was able to just transcribe these and turn them into a sort of relatively succinct adaptation. So this gives you a bit of a sense of what my process used to be like. These are actually pencils, so I do everything by hand. This is actually from a comic I did on Alcatraz, one of the attempted estates by John Giles in the 1930s, 1940s this was, and it was for the national parks. So this is a pencil page, and then I do an ink pass, just literally on the top of the pencils, then I erase the pencils and add watercolors. And in this case, actually, I did lettering by hand, but often I'll do it digitally to allow for translation. So you can see one of the main reasons that I find visual storytelling through comics has really helped me engage in all these other different forms of storytelling is compositionally, your approach to it is relatively similar. So I'm still trying to lead the reader's eye through the page from left to right, up to down, and create a thread that is easy for them to follow. But similarly, unlike film, it doesn't necessarily, it's not a passive experience, so you can, it's up to the reader to linger on particular panels or parts of the page. How interactive links can work within it. So this is a piece that ran on Truthout. Hopefully if it loads. You'll see, how many of you have heard of ThingLink? Okay. So basically what it is it's freeware, you should try and use it if you can. You literally upload images and then you can anchor different points in your images, and it can be a great way of adding supportive evidence or footnotes, annotations within your images. So this was about the sort of similar to what Naomi Klein was reporting on in the shock doctrine about how post-Katrina was the ideal opportunity for sort of a vigorous injection of privatized charter schools throughout New Orleans. And here especially you get to see quite how much information you can consolidate inside one single image. So here you have the children being pulled toward, the students I should say, being pulled towards this Psi Academy, this charter school, but they're being pulled by private banks, which are listed here, and there's more information here about their board members. And then I suppose the glacier that Psi Academy sits atop of is founded by these three huge, less conspicuous foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sun America, and the Walden Foundation. So, and here, just to represent both sides, we have two critics, one pro, one against, rowing in different directions. It's a subtle metaphor for the healthy dialogue. So this is another piece that I did on human trafficking, again trying to represent slightly drier contextual legal issues in a more appealing way. So these are some of the clauses within SB 180, the anti-human trafficking legislation that was rolled out in the Bay. And again, incorporating first-person testimony as well. This is for the San Francisco Public Press. The one that questions the nature of objectivity and how even in the process of asking someone a series of interview questions, you've already shaped the way that they might respond to you by dint of you being different, a foreigner, ethnically, gender-based. You know, all of these different contrasts can obviously impact the nature of the stories that you're being told by them. So this is a sample piece from my graphic novel about human trafficking in Nepal. I spent a year living in Kathmandu and interviewing various survivors. So this gentleman here had actually been tricked into selling his kidney on the black market, which is increasingly popular. And so you can see here, this is me sweltering in the heat, being bombarded by the Devanagari that you can see down here, as people are sort of questioning my intentions and asking what this project was about. So it was actually, and here you can see in the upcoming slides. This is kind of an introduction to some of the challenges I faced in trying to represent exactly what graphic journalism is. So it's quite hard to win people over, but here I am in the field showing them the drawing that I actually did of, as I mentioned, that gentleman before. So you tell them, you know, you're a graphic journalist and you're trying to obviously do this in a way that's non-exploitative and you know, I don't come with a hidden agenda. And there's this sort of dramatic pause. And then I turn to my fixer and he's like, he's a journalist, artist. They sort of nod their heads. So, you know, you're up against, it's certainly a more nuanced role, but I wanted to represent, you know, some of the difficulties that you do come across. It's not just a question of, oh, well, this guy told me the story and it was really simple. So I guess last but not least, really what I see and the sort of the move now into transmedia is comics and illustrations as a sort of a form of narrative visualization rather than data visualization. So this actually is a sample comic that I did that it was a illustrated guide to the financial crisis, and as you scrolled through each panel up the top, it went in parallel. It was accompanied by the Dow Jones Index and how that sort of spiked and fell at the different points as we scrolled through the story. So it was, in that way, sort of a tandem syncing of two sort of forms of visual media to try and keep people's interest and give them that sort of sense of context. A similar one that I did for cartoon movement was the Mizzou Square Massacre, which my students in the capstone conversions class are now intimately familiar with. But essentially what it was is the juxtaposition of multiple contrasting testimonies in a single screen. So I'd already read a great deal about, you know, the Blackwater troops, the private contractors that now everyone knows has been sort of renamed several times, but I think was ZXE, has since become something else. How their account obviously differed to the Iraqi civilians, not to mention the traffic police that were working at the time. So what I did, and this was all in Flash, is I rendered this along a timeline and was able to have, through a series of rollovers, you can see as you roll over, you're able to get the different perspectives of the various different people who are involved. Here are the traffic police in green, and the Blackwater troops are in red. And then as you scroll through this timeline, they move to where they were at that precise minute in the event. And the panels let you know, again, from that first person perspective, what they were going through. So this has heavily informed the sort of work that I'm trying to do now that the technology is sort of caught up. Flash, RIP. And as you can see as well, another thing, again, that I mentioned is that people are often critical of the way that you substantiate visual evidence. So I hyperlinked the documents that I got the information from into the actual piece itself. So by clicking on particular instances, you can see you get the sensitive but unclassified missives from the embassy and other sources. So I'm whizzing through this, but you can see the link if it's still up online. And so what happened in this incident was the car rolled forward, someone was shot, they thought it posed a threat, so they opened fire, and then another bus came along, and again, I think it was a sort of question of the moving targets became like a real sort of touch point for catalyzing the tragedy that unfolded up soon after, and then the convoy sped off. So continuing that interactive bent, in 2009, when the elected president of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, was deposed by the de facto government led by Micheletti, there was a great deal of sort of polemic in the press, but no one really covered the backstory and the historical context that may have led up to it. And I found that comics and this sort of visual media is a great way of presenting those multiple instances in a singular, sort of succinct way. So I wanted to paint that historical link between all of it. And to do that, I serialized a comic that went viral, I think on Boing Boing, and then turned it into an iPhone app. And again, it was a question of you could tap the screen and it brings up the sources. So that was one success that led again to sort of where I am. And the beauty of comics again is that with less text involved, it becomes easier to translate, and internationally, sort of interest in it grew and grew. So this is it in Danish, and Greek, and in Japanese, all translated voluntarily by readers. So one other instance of prototypes that I was experimenting with was on the criminal court. And so here you can see, if you can imagine the Blackwater shootings were a spatial exploration of readerly agency, allowing people to choose where in the story they wanted to move and the different perspectives, then this is sort of a chronological exploration. So time is really the medium here. So here you can move through left and right, hopefully. Yes, thank God. Left and right, and you can see the accompanying timeline at the bottom move through, and then you can see underneath some of the panels have almost like subsidiary evidence or arguments. So here you can see there's a question about, you ask a question to the reader, why there have been so many obstacles. So one of the reasons behind one of the obstacles is this, but then there are cons, so pro 1 and 2, and con 1. So it's, again, trying to put both sides of a story in a sort of a simultaneous space so that the reader isn't constantly distracted. And it's also beyond breaking out of that sort of linearity and that sort of forced limit of text. So again now, I mean, it's not that I'm lambasting text per se, it's more that I think that with the technology that's available now, and the number of devices that everyone has taped to their eyeballs around the clock, there are different opportunities for telling stories. So this, iPad version. And then this, adapting my stories to iPads and peripherals got me thinking about some more of this sort of multimedia and how to incorporate it. So one instance, for example, was this for Symbolia magazine. This is available, it's a graphic journalism magazine available only on tablets, and as you click certain of the panels which have sort of annotations, you can see embedded content. So here it talks about the brick kilns, and then I believe, well, maybe the media isn't here, that this is footage of taken from the brick kilns. Similarly, down here you can see, you can click and it gives you a sort of a breakdown. I think actually, it'll give you, so what I also want to show to the reader is kind of a sense of transparency. So to really convey that sense that good stories aren't just born in a singular moment and they sort of live for a moment on the front page and then die. There's a whole process that goes into it, and so I think readers are really interested in like the special features or under the hood kind of deal. So here, for example, you can see this is drawn on site when I'm interviewing. I asked people to break down this is a cabin restaurant in Nepal. Effectively, it's sort of the equivalent of like a strip club in the West. But basically, you go in, you pay ridiculously inflated prices for food and drink, usually alcohol, and as a result, in the small cabins that you can see here, the waitress sort of becomes your property for the amount of time that you're in there. These girls are usually very, very young and in there, obviously, under false pretenses and tricks. So I was able to talk to a survivor and get this layout, and then from there I was able just quickly in front of her to try and work it up into like a first-person perspective. And then from that, once she had corroborated that, I was then able to draw it up into the final version that you can see down here. So moving through, these are also some of the feedback groups that I attended, again, trying to just get around using a camera. And so in a lot of ways, my role originally starts as sort of a courtroom sketcher of sorts. These, again, are interviews done live and direct. It fosters a real sense of trust and has led to, I think, richer stories for it. Similarly, these are sketches done on site at a brick kiln in Bhaktapur, just outside of Kathmandu in the east. And so this sort of treatment was featured in the Trafficking in Persons report by the State Department as a different way to cover human trafficking. And the sketch that he has in his hands right there is this guy. And that was the original sketch from the comic that I showed you 10 slides ago. If you're still with me. By the way, feel free to throw up any hands or ask any questions at any point if you're interested. And then this is obviously hiding his identity, but this is sort of his reaction to it. Finished pages. And sometimes I include the actual artwork of those I interview as well, sort of, again, fostering that sense of dialogue. So one of the really exciting parts of my stay out in Nepal was when the BBC contracted me to do a story adapting one of the testimonies that I had recorded into a comic for them, and the reaction was crazy. It had, I think, 1.2 million views in like 2 days, so I don't think anyone was really expecting it, and it was a real testimony, I think, to the fact that so few people are working in this medium in a sort of real-time context, although obviously it becomes harder to render truly current events, given sort of the challenge of being up against Twitter. 140 characters is almost the opposite end of the creative spectrum to drawing comics. But this is Lakshmi telling the story, this is sort of the opening of the comic. And again, I usually directly transcribe what my fixer has translated to get that sense of sort of native tongue in there. And then this is it in Nepali. And as I mentioned, it's actually being used as part of a sort of a pioneering trial by the State Department and Stanford and Vanderbilt out in the field in Nepal currently to measure the impact of different forms of visual media. So in Chitwan province in the south central region of Nepal, and you know, there are also a series of questions about how they respond to the different narratives and what is it about the visual medium that might stay with them more. And then we're doing a follow-up survey with them in a few months to see which form of visual media, or which form of media, I should say, has the most retention, has the highest retention rate. And this comic is coming out in Vice magazine next month. So actually, it's got quite a funny title. It's A Sorry State of Affairs, the editor suggested. So I fought him on it, and then, as we know, editors always win. So you know, it's been good. It was a real, in a way, a prototype for me to try and take a single arc of the graphic novel and the investigation and then pitch it to multiple media sources. So it can, as I mentioned, it can be quite malleable. But when it comes to tech, this is me from a recent stint at the, oh, that's interesting. Okay, maybe that's, let's see. Okay, so it does work. Fine. So this is a piece I did for Medium magazine, again, which sort of optimized for tablets, and the idea of just incorporating a little bit of animation, just enough to keep people their attention spans somewhat titillated as they read through. And it's optimized again for tablets and mobile devices, so minimal text with some GIF animation, sort of Vine-esque. This is the idea of, as you can imagine, I don't know, I was on the fence originally when I went about the nature of these different devices and incorporating wearables into every part of your body, and how, you know, it just effectively means your attention is divided constantly. But there are obviously some advantages to using it that I'll go into. So Mark Fury is another guy who has been experimenting with animation, albeit in a more satirical context. He won a Pulitzer, I think a few years ago now, for his animation work. So it is being increasingly recognised. It's the Amazon drone, because Robert Scoble was talking about how wearables will be so ubiquitous that by the time it becomes fully embraced, we'll simply have to walk down the same route, and our wearable will tell us that, you know, our regular coffee is being bought if we look at something for 10 minutes. Yeah?
You keep saying that, you know, you sketch on a comic, and when you think of comics are just, they're just such an artistic medium. And then when you think of journalism, you know, there are so many connotations to that. So how much artistic liberty do you take when you're doing your comic sketches, especially about, you know, the comic strip when you did in Kathmandu or in Nepal?
Yeah, I mean, I try to take as little as possible. I really don't see it as any sort of flight of fancy. Everything is based, where possible, I'll use picture reference, most definitely. Typically what I'll do is I will take a ton of picture references which sort of make the worst holiday snaps ever, so it'll be like of the texture of the floor and the ceiling and the gravel and all that stuff, but avoid putting anyone on camera, and then draw them like a courtroom sketch artist, and then sort of amalgamate the two together. So I really rely on using reference as much as I can, and I definitely won't, when I am doing any recreations, it will often be with the direct participation of the interviewee. So, as I showed you with the cabin restaurant girl, I was able to draw things out and say, was it like that? And she said, oh no, there are more cabins or less, or, so in the few moments where I do, if any, take any liberties, I ensure that they are justified and corroborated for exactly that reason. But it's also worth mentioning, even edited, photographs or any of the visual media that we've grown up trusting has been framed and edited in a certain way. Potentially, obviously, it's less conspicuous, but elements have been left out on purpose, or nowadays it's quite easy to Photoshop. Even one of the a very prestigious photojournalism award, I think, was rescinded because someone had composited 2 images. So I think there's a great deal of, it's easier to hold this sort of form accountable, but all forms should be accountable. So then this talks, just continuing on, these are different, again, sort of trying to incorporate different, like I mentioned, the infographics, and then, there is sometimes, around Silicon Valley, I always find that Gandhi gets sort of rolled in as the poster boy for every form of wearable tech, whether it's Apple or whatever, so sort of trying to reclaim it, because all these big corporations talk about doing what Gandhi would want, but I'm not sure if he would actually be into Google Glass. And then, there's always that disparity between the reality and some of the sort of smoke and mirrors of the industry. So people were talking about Iron Man and the interface and everything like that, but it was actually like putting on one of those slide projectors you get on holiday. But we'll get there, I'm sure. So coming full circle to sort of my current stint here, Reynolds, I had thought about trying to incorporate the work that I did in Nepal into some of my prototypes, and the reason actually that I have speakers is that I've experimented with animation, documentary animation, trying to again share these stories in a way that is compelling but doesn't jeopardize the survivor in any way. So before I move on to this slide, I want to try and show you one of those. So this is sort of a prototype animation that I've done.
My house was like a goat house, very small, not good. It was made out of mud with a grass roof. Before this happened, I studied up to grade 7. The man who sold me was a neighbor. He was very old, around 50. His wife was very young, from high caste, Brahmin, and that's why she always looked so good. I met with them many times. They said they had a job for me, selling clothes at a shopping center in New Delhi. Mom knew them. She trusted them. My brother was too young to go. They offered me 5,000 Indian currency for 1 month's work. No one discouraged me from taking the job. My uncle's daughter had already gone there, so my family forced me to go. I wanted to study, but family comes first.
So again, it's not Disney level, but it's hopefully enough to put you in that scene and sort of make you, I guess, to bring about a sort of a more direct connection with a story rather than the traditional reading through. Some of the stories put in text alone, I feel people can become desensitized to, and so this way I wanted to try and foster a sense of connection between the reader and the subject. So, going back to this, I was working on that prototype in Nepal when obviously Ferguson, the tragic incident in Ferguson happened on August 9th. And so I went down there and ended up doing some sketching of the liquor store where the alleged robbery took place and the insanely huge police presence that was hard to miss. And then also, I found that in a lot of cases, despite huge descriptions, there wasn't really a physical layout that had been provided by the press of where all these incidents were happening and how it was linked in sort of a chronological timeline. So I put that together, and that these are my initial sketches. So again, just a really, you can see this is directly scanned of my sketchbook, which is why there's sort of an errant hand as I started sketching her again. But she was talking so much that I ended up using it for quotes. I'll also record audio if they'll let me, and then transcribe that later. And then that became this story. Hold on. So again, sort of pretty raw, and again, these are all just direct scans, so this was actually cut out and highlighted, which is why it looks like I was drunk when I wrote it. So I hope that there was a real immediacy to this sort of reporting, and like I said, that sort of direct contact. It's actually a real character, Super Prayer Man, the guy who he dresses as Superman every day and runs down Florissant High Street. So you've seen sort of my background and where I've come from, and really what I want to do now is, or what I'm working on, is incorporating all these different devices and formats into a more interactive experience that can go cross-platform. So I've experimented previously with iPhones, and I'm now building a interactive version using Unity and Oculus. Have you all heard of the Oculus Rift? So the Oculus Rift is a headset for virtual reality that Facebook recently bought for I think $2 billion. And effectively what it does is it has these two lenses, and it allows you to, with a motion sensor that came out of the latest build, the second build, it allows you to inhabit a 3D virtual environment and sort of look around as if you're actually there. I was going to prototype the headset itself tonight, but I realized that it doesn't actually come with, or rather it takes up so many of the ports that I wouldn't be able to display it on the screen. So I do have a working version, however, that I can show you through this. And effectively what I wanted to do is I wanted to try and incorporate multiple devices, as I say, to create an experience where the story doesn't have just a start and an end. It's more of a story world, right? It's a space that you can explore and inhabit in a way that you can't with traditional stories. So if this works, you'll have to give me a moment. I'm just going to... And I'm truly at the mercy of technology here, so hopefully it will work. Okay, well perhaps while I get this working, I will show you a video that again my great students in the Convergence class put together that gives you a bit of a backstory to how I put it together, and then I'll show you actually what it looks like. Transmedia is the telling of a single story across multiple platforms and devices. So it's using the same narrative thread, but telling part of that story through, say, tablets as well as phones as well as desktops. So what I wanted to do was recreate the Michael Brown crime scene in 3D. Visited the scene and was able to canvas a number of other photographers and use their photos as reference materials. I drew up the area, and then I actually, using SketchUp, Google SketchUp, I was able to import the actual geomap into Google SketchUp, so I was absolutely 100% certain of where the different buildings were. So fortunately, with this technology, you can drop a geolocated scene onto a set of axes and then build up the models from there, having very sort of accurate foundations. once I had the SketchUp model, I then worked with a team that built the model fully rendered in Unity. We will sync that with the devices, so with the iPhones and the tablets, essentially using triggers to then revert back to the iPad and iPhone and panels that will allow users to move through this virtual environment, being notified as they reach certain beacons which testimonies they can view. So with the Ferguson project serving as an example template, essentially what I did is I started out by transcribing the eyewitness testimonies into a Google Doc. From there, I worked them up into a sketch format, which I would be able to share with editors at the sort of the draft level to allow for further comments or additional changes or annotations. Then I created final art, which I then coloured, and it was from that that I was able to then export each of the panels into the iPhone format. Essentially, what I want to do is take scripts or investigations, typically that are text only, and work and collaborate with newsroom organisations and turn those stories into more of a narrative, sequential, either comic or interactive piece, essentially a transmedia piece that could work across the platforms. In that way, we'd be able to adapt a long-form textual piece into something that could comprise a mobile app or a series of web animations or an interactive, immersive walkthrough, as you can see with Unity. Really what I wanted to do is marry the technology that will give readers the opportunity to experience this scene in a way that hasn't really been done before, as well as hopefully push them closer to making their own minds up. Okay, so that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of what the prototype looks like. I'm just currently wrestling with getting on. I just need to port my phone so you can see what's happening on my phone rather than hold up a demo here. But does anyone have any questions in the meantime? Yeah.
Are there any types of stories or like kind of categories you feel are better represented in this sort of sketch form rather than photojournalism? Or
Like what sort of stories suit the medium better? I think oral testimonies are pretty important. Like usually a direct contact where you're either recreating sort of Studs Terkel-like, these oral testimonies, or situations where there isn't reference material, and you're allowed, you can fill almost that gap in a way that isn't over the top or you don't take too many liberties with. I think it also, but like I said before, it can be very malleable as well, so I find that making bridges, cognitive links between historical periods can also be easier when done with images rather than text, just because we're able, I think, because we process so much information visually, the visual cortex sort of precedes almost our verbal reasoning, that you can situate multiple different screens or multiple different periods visually and move between them more easily than if you just sort of read through and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. So I think that's a good way to do it. I think preserving moments, it's easier to inhabit a specific moment visually because unlike cinema where you have to pause it, frame by frame, here you can really, it's up to the reader, they have the agency to jump in or out at particular moments. So there's like, 3 different instances I would say that are best. Okay, let's see. I'm determined to make this work. Let's quit this later. No, I'm trying to get AirPlay on my phone, and so it's just a question of if it pops up, it pops up. An AirDrop has popped up, but unfortunately, AirPlay hasn't. So I can give you a run through at the moment now, and then maybe if you wanted to come up and have some concrete examples. So this is, I'm not sure if I can make it bright. So this is the reconstructed Ferguson scene. So this is built in Unity with 3D models. It is fully interactive. You can walk around. Here, I'll make this full screen. Wow. Okay, maybe I won't make this full screen. Obviously does not like being full screen. Okay, so you walk around, and the idea is that each of the beacons that you can see are flashing colours. They each represent a eyewitness testimony. And that, again, has all been tracked. So here, for example, next to the police car, as you walk across it, so I'm not sure if you heard that, but that was a notification that I've crossed this beacon. And the way it works is, as you cross each of the beacons, it opens up in the app that I've built, and it unlocks the different stories, which are represented panel by panel on this app. So you sort of, it's a combination of this graphic journalism using the direct quotes. So as I'm walking around, I believe this one was video. So when I open this in the app, it's actually some of the YouTube footage from the scene. I'm sorry you can't see it. So, I hope that gives you an insight into what I've been working on. I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Did you do this through Xcode? Did you actually program an application individually, or are you just working with the community?
No, it's a local app. Yeah, it's a native app.
Oh,
yeah.
That's cool.
Thanks. Yeah, at the moment, so we have the app infrastructure, and what we're effectively doing at the moment, we just run off a very small local server, but we're going to build that out to have our own hosted server, and then